My name is Sophia Bright. I'm 28 years old, and until recently, I truly believed I was weeks away from marrying the man I was meant to grow old with. His name is Danny Hale. He's 27, a little shy, quietly intelligent, and the kind of person who remembers the way you take your coffee even when you forget yourself. We had been together almost 4 years, and for most of that time, our life felt steady in that rare, grounding way people write novels about. I used to think that meant safety. In hindsight, I'm not sure if it was safety or just the illusion of it. We met at a mutual friend's New Year's Eve party back in 2019. It wasn't some dramatic cinematic moment where our eyes locked across a crowded room. It was quieter, simpler. I was standing by the balcony door trying to escape the noise for a moment, and Danny came over to ask if I was cold because the air was blowing in behind me. He had this soft, careful way of speaking that immediately made me lower my guard. We talked for hours that night, tucked into a corner, while everyone else toasted to resolutions they'd forget by February. We exchanged numbers before midnight, started dating within the month, and fell into something real before either of us had time to question it. By the end of 2020, we had moved in together. We painted the apartment during lockdown, burned a pot of pasta because we got distracted making out in the kitchen, binged documentaries until we fell asleep on each other's shoulders, and adopted this rhythm that felt grown up in a comforting way. I won't pretend everything was magical or perfect. We had fights like any couple, stupid ones about groceries and deeper ones about work stress or emotional exhaustion. But we always tried. At least I did. At least I thought he did too. Danny proposed at the end of 2022 during a trip to the Oregon coast. He brought me to this rocky lookout spot just before sunset. He was shaking a little, which I assumed was the cold, but when he pulled out the ring box, I realized it was nerves. I cried. Happy tears. Or I believe they were anyway. Looking back, I wonder if part of me already sensed the fault line underneath our feet, a small crack I didn't want to acknowledge. Once the engagement became official, we dove into wedding planning. By late 2023, everything was set, venue overlooking the water, florals arranged, menu, finalized, invitations sent. I paid for most of it, and I never minded. Danny had taken a pay cut earlier that year to work at a nonprofit he genuinely cared about, and I was doing well as a senior design analyst. I believe partnership meant support. I liked supporting him. But even in the midst of planning, there was always one part of Danny's life that felt like a dim, stubborn shadow, his ex-girlfriend, Juliana Pierce. He didn't talk about her often, but when he did, it came with a tightness around his mouth like he was choosing each word carefully. They had dated for 5 years in their early 20s, and according to him, they ended things because she wanted to travel while he wanted stability. It sounded peaceful enough, respectful even, but there was something in the way he said her name, a softness I couldn't explain. I tried not to be insecure. Everyone has a past. God knows I do. But Danny still followed Juliana's entire family on social media. He kept old photos from their trips in a hidden folder on his phone. I'd stumbled on them once while digging for a picture for his mother's birthday gift. When I gently brought it up, he insisted it was just nostalgia, nothing more. And maybe I wanted so badly to believe him that I buried the discomfort instead of listening to it. As spring crept closer and the wedding felt less like a dream and more like a countdown, Danny began acting strange. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, just small things. He would go quiet in the middle of a conversation. He would ask me questions like, "Do you think people ever really stop loving someone? Do you believe everything happens for a reason? Do you think closure matters before new beginnings?" They sounded philosophical, even thoughtful, but something in them made my stomach twist. I thought he was just stressed. His mother was a perfectionist nightmare, always criticizing our plans, our choices, my choices. His younger sister had her own crises spiraling at home. He had a heavy workload. I told myself he was just overwhelmed. But then, one evening, 12 days before the wedding, that uneasy tension, the kind that hovers like humidity before a storm, finally broke open. We were sitting on the couch after dinner. The TV was off. The apartment felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Danny wasn't looking at me. His hands were trembling slightly. My heart dropped long before he spoke. "Sophia," he said softly, "I need to talk to you about something important." I nodded, waiting. I swear I could feel the floor tilt beneath me before the words even hit the air. He finally lifted his gaze, and there was fear in it. Not fear of hurting me, but fear of how I would react. "I need to spend a weekend away with Juliana. For a moment, everything inside me went completely still, like my mind shut down to protect itself from the impact. Then the shock rushed in all at once, hot and sharp. I stared at him, trying to process the sentence, trying to make it make sense in any universe where love and loyalty coexisted. But he kept going. He said he needed closure, that there were unresolved feelings, that he couldn't marry me until he faced his past in person. He said it the way someone might tell you they need to pick up dry cleaning. Calm, reasonable, expecting compliance. The world didn't shatter, not yet. But the first crack appeared thin as a hairline, and I felt it. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. My mind was trying to rearrange his words into something rational, something less catastrophic. But no matter how I parsed them, they remained the same. Danny, my fiancé. The man who wanted to marry me in less than 2 weeks wanted to go spend a private weekend away with his ex-girlfriend. I finally managed to speak my voice steadier than I felt. What do you mean you need to spend a weekend with Juliana? What exactly does that even look like? Danny swallowed his jaw, tightening with that defensive tremor I'd only ever seen when he was caught between guilt and justification. It's not what you think. She rented a cabin a few hours away. It's just for talking, processing, ending things properly. I never got closure with her, and it's been weighing on me more than I realized. The audacity of the word closure hit me like a slap. Closure now. After proposing. After engagement, photos, venue, deposits, dress fittings, guest lists, he continued, I wanted to go into our marriage clear-headed, whole. If I don't do this now, I feel like I'll always wonder. I stared at him. Why didn't you bring this up years ago? Why now, 12 days before our wedding? His answer made my skin crawl. Because we never had a real goodbye. We just drifted apart. There were things left unsaid. He added with a fragile smile, I need to close that chapter before I start a new one with you. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. There are moments in life when instinct speaks louder than logic, louder than hope. This was one of them. Something in me snapped into clarity. Danny, you're asking me to be okay with you going on a romantic cabin trip with your ex. This isn't closure. This is something else. It's not romantic, he insisted. It's emotional honesty. It's maturity. I need to do this for us. For us? The words were so twisted they barely registered as English. I finally said the thing he didn't expect. If you go, Danny, we're over. His face crumpled, not with remorse, but frustration. I knew you'd react like this. You always make everything about insecurity. I thought you trusted me more than that. In that moment, I realized he wasn't asking for permission. He was asking for my compliance. He stood abruptly. I am not doing anything wrong. I'm trying to make sure I'm fully present for our marriage. You're the one turning this into something ugly. I felt something cold settle inside me. No. Danny, I'm drawing a boundary. I'm not marrying someone who needs one last emotional retreat with his ex to feel ready. He grabbed his jacket, anger in every movement. I need space. I'm staying at my mom's tonight. He left, slamming the door hard enough that a picture frame rattled on the wall. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door like it might apologize on his behalf. But it didn't. It just sat there silently confirming that the man I loved had chosen his past over our future. The next morning, everything began spiraling. Danny's mother called first. She didn't even say hello. Sophia, sweetie, you're being ridiculous. Emotional closure is important. A weekend is nothing compared to a lifetime. I bit back the urge to laugh. You would have let your husband spend a weekend alone with his ex 2 weeks before your wedding. There was a pause, a long one. Then she sighed. Men are different. Stop being dramatic. Then his sister texted, seriously, let Danny breathe. He's trying to grow. Support him. Then his two closest friends, Sophia, he's choosing you. He just wants peace with his past. Then, to my absolute disbelief, even one of my friends messaged, girl, it really might just be closure. Don't throw away something good over a weekend. It felt like I had woken up in some alternate universe where betrayal was branded as therapy. By noon, Danny's mother called again, her tone sharper. You're going to ruin everything if you don't stop overreacting. I hung up before she finished her sentence. I spent the rest of the day in a daze rereading old messages between Danny and me, trying to pinpoint the moment everything changed, trying to understand how love could turn into entitlement so quickly. That night, silence. No call from him, no apology. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting every hour he wasn't home. The following morning, I received a single text from him, I'm going this weekend. I hope someday you'll understand. He didn't ask. He didn't check in. He didn't even pretend to care how I felt. He just made his decision. I canceled the florist that afternoon. I canceled the suit rentals and emailed the venue to prepare paperwork for the deposit loss. I called each invited guest one by one. Some asked what happened, most didn't. I kept it simple. The wedding is off. Most people assumed I got cold feet. Some assumed Danny did. No one imagined the truth. No one imagined that the man who claimed to love me more than anything would choose an ex-girlfriend over the life we built. By Friday night, his car was still at his mother's. On Saturday morning, I saw an Instagram story not from him, but from a friend of Juliana's, a blurry shot of a wooded cabin porch. A second later, it disappeared. Maybe accidental, maybe not. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I felt something heavier than sadness. I felt clarity, a sharp, painful clarity that left no room for hope. On Saturday night, around midnight, after staring at my phone for hours, I almost texted him not to ask him to come back, not to argue, but simply to ask why. But I didn't. I knew the answer would only cut deeper. Instead, I put the phone face down on the table and whispered aloud to no one, to myself. I'm not losing a future, I'm losing a lie. And for the first time since he walked out, I felt something close to calm. Danny returned from the weekend late Sunday evening. I didn't see him, but I knew because his car was gone from his mother's driveway. I waited not because I hoped he would reach out, but because I wanted to see which version of him would show up. The remorseful one who realized the gravity of what he'd done, or the delusional one who believed he'd completed some noble pilgrimage of emotional clarity. The answer came Monday night. He sent one message: I'm back. I still love you. I hope we can talk when you're ready. No apology, no acknowledgement of pain, no recognition of what he had destroyed. Just a calm, entitled assumption that I'd been waiting in suspended animation for him to return. I stared at the text until the letters blurred. There was something almost insulting about how ordinary it looked, like he expected me to thank him for coming home from a romantic retreat with his ex-girlfriend, like he believed a single sentence could erase the weekend he'd chosen someone else willingly, deliberately. I didn't reply. The next morning, I started canceling the rest of the wedding arrangements. Catering, the DJ, the shuttle service. I watched my inbox fill with refund confirmations, reduced deposits, and cancellation fees. Every email was a little funeral for a future that no longer existed. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was deleting the shared wedding folder Danny and I had built for a year. The color palettes, the vows we drafted, but hadn't finalized the guest list. We argued over and then laughed about. I pressed delete and waited for the confirmation window to pop up, a small box, asking, "Are you sure you want to remove this permanently?" Yes, I was. I lost about $6,000 total. It stung. But compared to becoming someone's second choice for the rest of my life, it felt like a small price to pay. Soon the calls started coming, not from Danny. He remained predictably silent, but from the guests. My cousin bewildered, a coworker concerned, a friend asking, "Are you okay? What happened?" I told them all the same thing. The wedding is off. That's all I want to say. Word spread quickly, and because people fill silence with whatever version entertains them most, a narrative formed. Apparently, I had gotten cold feet. I was overwhelmed. I was the one who panicked. Danny let people believe it. He didn't correct a single person. His friends stopped talking to me. His sister unfollowed me. Two of my own friends distanced themselves quietly, as if having boundaries somehow made me contagious. Even the cashier at the grocery store looked at me strangely when I walked in because, yes, small towns will always find a way to make your heartbreak community property. For a week, I drifted. I worked in silence. I slept badly. I kept expecting the pain to burst into anger, but instead it settled like fog, heavy, quiet, suffocating. I scheduled a therapy appointment. When the counselor asked what happened, I tried to speak, but the words punched their way out in fragments. He left to see her. Cabin. Closure. Expected me to accept it. She nodded gently the way people do when they confirm that your version of reality is real, even if the people around you insist it's not. It was the first time I felt something crack loose inside me. Not grief, not rage, but relief. Relief that someone understood. 3 days after that session, the truth started unraveling. A mutual friend not close to either of us, but someone who attended the same monthly dinner gatherings called me unexpectedly. She sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. "I didn't want to get involved," she said quietly, "but I think you deserve to know. Danny was at Lisa's birthday dinner last night with Juliana." My chest tightened. What do you mean with her? He was holding her hand, the friend continued, laughing, introducing her as someone who helped him through the breakup. Sophia, they looked together, very together. They looked together. The word throbbed in the air like a bruise. That night, I lay awake, replaying every moment of the last month, every subtle shift in Danny's mood, every late-night conversation he initiated about soulmates and closure. None of it was philosophical. None of it was emotional growth. It was preparation. A week later, it got worse and better. A bridesmaid from Danny's side, someone I'd always gotten along with but wasn't particularly close to, sent me a DM out of nowhere. "I'm sorry for how everything went down. You didn't deserve it." That was all she said. No details, no explanations. But it was the first confirmation that Danny's version of the story was unraveling behind the scenes. 2 days later, she messaged again, this time with screenshots. Long threads of conversation between her and Juliana dated weeks before Danny ever mentioned closure. Juliana talking about how Danny had reached out months ago, how they were reminiscing, how the calls were getting longer, how the spark was still there, how they were planning to meet just to talk, how they booked the cabin 3 weeks before Danny told me he needed it. And then the final message, the one that hollowed me out in a way nothing else had. From Danny to Juliana. "If things don't work out, I can still marry Sophia. She'll always forgive me." For a long time, I didn't move. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, feeling something crack inside me, not my heart. No, that had already been broken long before this. What cracked was the last remaining piece of the illusion. The part that believed he had simply made a mistake. The part that believed he was conflicted, confused, overwhelmed. There was nothing conflicted about this. It was calculated, strategic, a betrayal disguised as soul-searching, a fallback plan wearing the mask of love. I wasn't his partner. I was his insurance policy. That night, for the first time since calling off the wedding, I cried. Not from heartbreak that had burned away. This was rage. Pure, scalding rage at having been lied to, minimized and manipulated, and then painted as the villain when I refused to tolerate betrayal. When the tears finally stopped, I opened my laptop. I didn't write to expose him or seek revenge. I didn't use names or locations or anything identifiable. I wrote for myself because I needed the truth to exist somewhere outside my head. I needed it written, documented, real. I told the story the way it had actually happened. The emotional cheating, the cabin, the manipulation, the family pressure, the lies that followed. I didn't post it for sympathy. I posted it because silence felt like complicity in my own humiliation. And once the story was out there, once strangers began responding with disbelief, outrage, and validation I hadn't received from anyone close to me, something inside me finally shifted. A clarity that had been denied, dismissed, and ridiculed was suddenly reflected back at me thousands of times over. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't insecure, I wasn't unreasonable. I was right, and that truth finally began to set me free. The post I wrote, anonymous, unpolished, poured straight from a wounded place inside me, was never meant to explode the way it did. I wrote it because I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of other people's version of my reality. I needed to carve out one small corner of the world where the truth wasn't twisted or minimized. When I hit submit, I expected maybe a handful of comments, a few strangers saying, "That sucks, I'm sorry." It didn't go that way. Within hours, the post spread. Thousands of comments poured in. People horrified on my behalf, people dissecting Danny's behavior, people sharing their own similar experiences. Some were heartbreakingly familiar. Others were furious enough for the both of us. But one thing echoed over and over. You didn't overreact, you protected yourself. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. What I didn't expect was how fast it would circle back to our circle of mutual friends. Apparently, someone or several someones recognized enough vague details, the timeline, the cabin, the canceled wedding, to connect the dots. And when screenshots of my anonymous post began circulating in group chats, Danny's carefully curated narrative began collapsing like a soaked cardboard box. The first sign came from the same bridesmaid who had sent me the screenshots earlier. Another message. He's panicking. People are asking questions he can't answer. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel. Vindicated, angry, relieved. Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. Later that afternoon, she messaged again. Juliana's freaking out too. Some of the bridal party is demanding the truth. She's not handling it well. Somehow, the idea of Juliana unraveling didn't make me feel triumphant. It just made me tired. Bone deep tired from the way lies tend to rot every person they touch, even the ones who thought they were benefiting from them. And then the apologies began. Not from Danny, of course not from Danny. From everyone else. His sister messaged me first, her tone stiff but unmistakably shaken. Sophia, I owe you an apology. I didn't know the full story. I judged too fast. I'm sorry. This was the same woman who called me controlling and overreactive less than 2 weeks prior. I didn't respond. Then his two closest friends, the ones who had lectured me about letting Danny grow, sent a joint message. We screwed up. We should have listened instead of taking sides. You didn't deserve any of that. The irony didn't escape me. They had believed Danny when he painted me as emotional, unstable, insecure because that story was easier than believing their friend could be selfish enough to sabotage his own wedding for nostalgia. But the apology that stunned me the most came from Danny's mother. A long email, formal, wordy, carefully composed. I could practically see her sitting at her kitchen counter typing slowly, trying to shape her guilt into something that sounded gracious. Sophia, I misjudged the situation. I want to apologize for the things I said to you. I was harsh. I was defensive on Danny's behalf. I didn't understand the depth of what was happening. I hope you can forgive me for my assumptions. She didn't ask for reconciliation. She didn't ask me to reconsider Danny. It was the closest she could come to admitting she'd championed her son's betrayal because it fit her worldview better. I didn't reply to her either. Meanwhile, according to the bridesmaid who had become my accidental informant, Danny's relationship with Juliana was already fraying. Juliana wasn't enjoying the attention, or more accurately, the scrutiny. She had expected romance, not consequences. She had expected a shiny reunion with Danny, not awkward questions from mutual acquaintances, wondering why she was holding hands with a man who'd just canceled his wedding. And Danny, God, Danny. Instead of standing beside her, he started trying to distance himself, pretending it wasn't that serious, minimizing what they'd done, acting like he just needed time to figure things out. Worse, he started hinting to people, not to me, that maybe he still had feelings for me, that maybe things had gotten complicated, that maybe with enough time we could find our way back. He was trying to keep both doors open again. It didn't work. The final collapse came a week later when I received another message from the bridesmaid. They're not together anymore. She dumped him. He's a mess. Of course she dumped him. She had gotten the thrill of rekindling something forbidden, but the moment responsibility showed up at the door, the spark fizzled. Nostalgia burns fast, but it burns out even faster. I didn't celebrate, I didn't smile, I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt surprisingly was pity, not for Juliana, but for Danny, because he had traded something real steady, loyal and loving for the illusion of a memory he'd rewritten in his head. And he was learning now brutally that a memory cannot love you back. 2 days later, Danny finally reached out, a message so long I had to scroll. It began with, I never wanted to hurt you, a lie. Then, I just needed clarity, another lie. Followed by, things with Juliana aren't what I thought. She's changed. No, they hadn't changed. He just didn't get the outcome he expected. Then, I miss you. I miss us. I know it's probably too late, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. I read it once, then again, then again. Not because it moved me, but because every time I read it, I saw more clearly how deeply he misunderstood the situation. He thought he had hurt me because he chose someone else. But the real wound wasn't his choice. It was the fact that he expected me to stay on standby in case that choice didn't work out. He wanted a safety net, not a partner. I didn't reply. I didn't block him. I didn't lash out. I didn't ask questions. I didn't seek explanations. I simply closed the message, turned off my phone, and went for a long walk in the cool evening air. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not happy, not healed, but free in a way I hadn't realized I wasn't before. Danny had mistaken my silence for weakness. He had mistaken my kindness for gullibility. He had mistaken my love for a guarantee. But now he understood something he never expected. There is no coming back when the door has been burned to ash. In the weeks that followed Danny's message, my life didn't magically snap back into place, but something inside me finally became still. Not numb, just settled like a lake after a storm. The ripples were still there, but they no longer threatened to pull me under. I moved out of the apartment we once shared. Packing up the life we built together wasn't as excruciating as I expected. What hurt wasn't the objects, but the illusion they represented. The mug he bought me from the coast, the framed photo from our first road trip, the blanket we picked out together for winter movie nights. They weren't relics of love anymore. They were artifacts of a story I had outgrown, or perhaps a story that had never fully belonged to me. My new place wasn't far, just enough distance that I didn't risk bumping into his family at the grocery store or spotting his car parked outside a cafe. It was small but bright, with high windows and quiet mornings, and for the first time in months, I began to sleep without the anchor of dread tugging at my chest. I focused on my work. I took long walks. I rearranged my kitchen until the cabinets made sense. I read more. I spoke less. I stopped feeling the urge to justify myself to people who hadn't cared enough to hear me when it mattered. I adopted a dog, a 3-year-old rescue mutt with mismatched eyes and a stubborn streak that reminded me of myself. I named her Willow. She wasn't great on a leash at first, but she loved curling up next to me on the sofa, warm and steady, and somehow that small, steady presence healed parts of me I didn't know were bruised. Life became quieter, not empty, just calm, peaceful, a soft hum instead of a hollow ache. I didn't check Danny's social media. I didn't ask about him. But the universe has a way of putting information in your path whether you want it or not. Mutual friends reached out in cautious, hesitant tones. "He's not doing well," one said. "He's been isolating," another whispered like it mattered. "He's trying to sort himself out." Someone else added, as if that was my responsibility. Then the final update. Juliana broke up with him. Apparently he wasn't ready for anything serious. She said he's emotionally unreliable. There was a time when that revelation would have gutted me. A time when I would have wondered if I wasn't worth fighting for, if I'd been easy to let go. But now, all I felt was a distant, quiet sadness, not for him, but for the pattern he refused to break. Nostalgia had always been his weakness. Fantasy had always outweighed reality. Juliana was never the woman he missed. He missed the version of himself he thought he could be with her. Once that illusion shattered, he was left with nothing but the consequences he'd built with his own hands. But none of it was my burden anymore. One afternoon, as I sat in my new living room with Willow curled against my legs, I received one more message. From Danny. A simple line, "I hope someday we can talk." I didn't respond, not out of malice, but because I understood something he didn't. Talking isn't closure, forgiveness isn't owed, and healing doesn't require revisiting the fire that burned you. I turned off my phone and watched the sunlight crawl across the floor. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't triumphant, it was simply peaceful. Weeks turned into months. I was promoted at work. I volunteered at a weekend shelter. I learned how to cook meals that didn't involve takeout containers. I made a few new friends. I rekindled friendships I'd neglected during my relationship, realizing how much of myself I'd unconsciously dimmed to fit the outline of Danny's comfort zone. And slowly, beautifully, the version of me before him began returning. More grounded now, more self-assured, more willing to walk away from anyone who saw my boundaries as obstacles instead of guidance. Sometimes I still think about the weekend he left. Not with pain, but like someone touching a scar they forgot they had. It's part of me now, a reminder that love without respect is just longing dressed in prettier words. A reminder that boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal who cared enough to honor them. The last time I saw Danny briefly from across a bookstore months after everything, he looked older. Tired. Not tragic, but worn down, in a way that comes from running back and forth between your past and your future, until your present gives out. He didn't approach me. He looked startled, maybe guilty, maybe hopeful, but I didn't stop walking. Not out of spite, but because the chapter was over, burned clean, closed by my choice, not his. I no longer needed answers. I no longer needed apologies. I no longer needed closure from him, because I finally understood the truth. I was the closure. I was the ending he never expected, the boundary he never thought I'd enforce, the loss he thought he could recover from whenever he wanted. But he was wrong. I didn't lose him. He lost me, the woman who loved honestly, who showed up fully, who believed in the life they planned. And he traded that for a fantasy of a past that didn't exist anymore. Maybe one day he'll understand the cost of what he threw away. Maybe not. Either way, his future is no longer my business. And as for me, I'm not rushing into dating. I'm not trying to fill a void. Instead, I'm looking for something quiet, something honest, something mutual. Something built on choices, not nostalgia, not desperation, not unfinished stories masquerading as romantic destiny. One day I'll meet someone who doesn't need to break me first to understand what love means. Someone who doesn't need a last weekend with an ex to decide whether I'm enough. Someone who recognizes the value of loyalty without requiring me to prove mine. And when that day comes, I will be ready. Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I finally remember who I am. And when I finally love again, it'll be with someone who doesn't need to betray me to find himself.